Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, InfoGov 17 team for bringing me out here. I'm really proud and privileged to be able to be up here today and to talk to you this afternoon about one of my absolute favorite topics that now I can't find the remote for, positioning yourself as a business enabler, how to do professional development as a professional today in 2017. I think one of the things that we often run into is that on the one hand, we don't have a lot of real good resources for how to go about doing this, and on the other hand, too few of us really take charge of our own professional development. And so over the next 35 minutes or so, I'd like to share some thoughts I have on how we as information professionals can really sort of position ourselves to not only help ourselves, but also really drive our organizations forward. As a housekeeping note, I understand that I'm the last session of the day. I understand that after this, you're all ready to go to dinner and or the bar. And I promise you, as a longtime speaker, I will not make you late for the bar. I don't promise you anything else, but I do promise that. Okay, for those of you not familiar with AIM, we've been doing information management since 1943, when we were founded as the National Microfilm Association. As information challenges have changed over the years, so have we, and today we're positioning ourselves as helping organizations with transforming themselves really into digital businesses through the process of intelligent information management. So if you're interested in more information about AIM, our website is down at the bottom of the slide. Okay, what I'd like to talk about today are sort of really three aspects of how I view information management as an information professional. And so I'm going to start by talking about what I think information professionals need to know, or at least be cognizant with, in order to be effective for their organizations today. Now, I'm going to present some kind of exhaustive lists. I understand that not everybody can learn everything about everything. If you find one of those people, hire them and throw money at them, because they're invaluable. But I think there are some things that we can do as individuals to sort of position ourselves a little bit better. I'm also going to talk about the different paths that we have to do that professional development. I understand that not all of you work for organizations that have unlimited training budgets. I'm a training guy. I know how that works, especially when budgets get tight. So we're going to talk about some various different resources that you can use to position yourself a little bit more effectively. And then finally, I'm going to talk about something that's been near and dear to my heart for probably 15 years now, and that is how to craft a personal professional development plan. I do this. I encourage people to do this. It's really a framework, not so much a copy and paste template, but I hope that you'll be able to take this with you and get some value out of it, as I have over the years. All right, so what do information professionals need to know today? We've had a lot of discussion already in the sessions that I've attended and in the opening keynote about the different types of information management disciplines and information management things that we all could be focusing on. I like to start maybe not at the beginning, but at a beginning. And in a beginning, we had the University of the Western Cape of South Africa. And in 2004, they presented this as a model for an information management body of knowledge. So I know there's a lot of efforts going on for information management. A lot of them are underway at this conference, and we'll continue to talk about those for the next couple of days. But this is not necessarily a new thing. And so as you look at the model here, you can see we've got business strategy and business benefits, and of course, technology. But equally, of course, it's not just technology, right? Information management today is much more about the people and the processes, and a little seasoning of technology here and there to kind of make it all go together. We took a crack at the piñata ourselves in 2005 or so, I think. This was what we called our ECM puzzle. And this was a poster. You guys remember posters? Printed big paper thingies you put in your cubicles? You guys remember cubicles? So we took this and we distributed it with our print magazine. I don't even remember what we called it that year. But we had a magazine, and we published this. And you can see here, our tagline at the time was capture, manage, store, preserve, and deliver. And so those were the elements in our mind of effective content management, really. But it included a lot of things that you would recognize from information management. We have records management. We have business process management. We have output and composition and all of the different elements that many of you would recognize from your jobs today. We like Mike 2. Mike 2 is an open source methodology that was developed by Bearing Point and Deloitte that really covers enterprise information management. And as you can see on the screen, it covers a lot of different disciplines, both sort of unitary disciplines, as you see in the various different columns, and also at the bottom, composite solutions, things like big data, the semantic enterprise, and agile information development. And so again, as I've only shown you 3 of these so far, and you can see already that there's a lot of overlap, but there are also some individual differences. I've seen this slide a couple of times today already. This is another variation on it. This is from the Information Governance Initiative. Every couple of years they do a survey and they ask practitioners in the space, which of these elements do you think is part of information governance? And of course, all of the above gets 34%. Records management, not a real big surprise there. Information security, compliance, et cetera. But again, even just looking at the ones that are most popular, the ones that are orange and that are blue, there's really not a lot of surprise there. I would expect somebody doing information governance to be pretty cognizant of those various different areas. And last but certainly not least, our own host, the Information Coalition, are doing some work of their own on an information management body of knowledge. And so if you look at the mapping between the various different disciplines and the industry groups or associations that are kind of related to that, that's a pretty good starting point. It's not an exhaustive list, but that's pretty good. I know that ARMA does a lot with records management. We do a lot with information management. IAPP is sort of the gold standard for privacy, at least in the US. And so we have all these different areas. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. I think the challenge comes, when I drop the mic, I think the challenge comes in that the definitive IAM body of knowledge today does not exist. And more importantly, I'm not sure that it can exist. With all due respect to everybody who's working on this, including Information Coalition, ARMA, and everybody else, there are some challenges with presenting a truly unified, unitary body of knowledge for information management. The first one is that we have boundary issues. And what I mean by that is that no matter how comprehensive an information management body of knowledge is, by definition, it has to leave some stuff out. I looked at the work that the Information Coalition has done in defining their body of knowledge, and they identified 60 separate domains and disciplines. And they asked you, the broader public, to vote and say, which ones of these are included. And again, the ones at the top, not really a big surprise. The ones that were more towards the bottom, a little bit more esoteric, maybe a little bit more focused and niche-y. 60 different disciplines in information management in contributing towards the information management body of knowledge. Engineering drawing management wasn't on there. Geographic information systems, not on there. Customer communication management, print output and print stream composition, all of the stuff that folks at associations like Explore do, not on there. This is not to denigrate the excellent, superb work that has been done by the Information Coalition or by any of their predecessors. It's simply the case, though, that there are so many different ways in which we can do information management, so many types of information to deal with, that if you tried to put everything on there, first of all, can you imagine that tome that you would get as a body of knowledge? You'd have to cart it around on wheels. Can you imagine the training for that? We already teach 4-day classes, and we only hit the high points of many of those disciplines. How do you teach an effective, comprehensive class on 65 or 70 or 90 different disciplines? And when it comes to certification, you'd be looking at the bar exam. You'd be looking at days of bar exams to try and take an exam that covered all of these areas at the level of depth that you would expect it. Finally, which among us, and I have lots of certifications, which among us would actually be able to pass a certification exam that covered 90 different disciplines? I'm not volunteering for it. I don't even know what they would charge for it. I'm scared to think about that. Boundary issues are a big deal, in other words. We also have a taxonomy issue, and what I mean by that is that we're at the premiere arguably the premier information governance conference in the US today, right? Many of you count yourselves as information governance professionals of one variety or another. But I submit to you that if I asked everybody in this room to write down your definition of information governance, carry the 2, we have about 50 people in here, we'd get pretty close to 50 different definitions. You can't use your phone to cheat, by the way. You can't look it up. So in trying to define information governance, I think your definition will change depending on whether you come from a records management background, an information security background, a data governance background. And so this creates interesting challenges when we define, well, what's an information professional need to know? Well, it kind of depends on the definition of information, doesn't it? And finally, we have something that I call the expertise dilemma. I know that many of us here are seasoned professionals, let us say. You've been there, you've done that, you got the scars, you have the t-shirts and the horror stories. Any body of knowledge, almost necessarily by definition, reflects the people who have been doing it in the industry successfully, and sometimes not so successfully, for a long period of time. That's good, to a point. When I first came into the industry, if I had taken or taught a class on information management, let's set the Wayback Machine to 1995. You remember 1995. We had Windows 95, right? And I'm sure all of you remember doing lots of interesting Windows 95 things at a DOS command prompt. Maybe some of you still do it. I suspect that most of us probably don't remember even what DOS command prompt looks like, much less how to play with it meaningfully. We had these newfangled things called DVDs. Burnable CDs, recordable CDs were still pretty new too. I remember learning, because I had to know it for my job, again, this is 1995, how many of you have ever jumpered IRQs on a motherboard? What about set SCSI IDs on multiple daisy chain SCSI devices? And I know I'm getting some looks throughout the room like, what? SCSI? That sounds pretty dirty. Well, it kind of was, just not in the way you're thinking. Setting up hardware dongles on parallel ports. We don't even have parallel ports anymore, right? So all of those things are things that you had to know in 1995. I learned how to HTML code by hand and set up this new thing called JavaScript, I think it was called, that would let you, your browser redirect automatically depending on whether you're using Netscape Navigator 4 or Internet Explorer 3. We don't talk about the Internet Explorers before 3. We just don't do it. So you had to know all of that. Now today, 22 years later, nobody does any of that. Anybody jumper a motherboard in the last, decade? A couple of you hobbyists out there. There's always got to be one. But we as a discipline, whether you're records management, even whether you're IT, by and large, some of you still do this, but most of us don't have to worry about SCSI buses and setting up new I/O cards inside of a laptop or a tower. We don't have to do that. That information is 20 years out of date. And yet if you asked me to write the body of knowledge for information management, I just might start there. And that's the problem that we have, is that too many of these bodies of knowledge are really driven by people who were trained and brought up and had their heyday with technologies and processes especially that are deprecated. How do you do records management of a Facebook-like? Do you have to do records management of a Facebook-like? Is a Facebook-like a record? I don't know if it's a record. Under certain circumstances, I'm sure it can be discoverable, though. And how does a body of knowledge sort of translate that? And so we want people who have that deep dive subject matter expertise. We want people who have been there and done that. But at the same time, those people have to be relevant today as well. And I think too many of us, we kind of been there, done that, and we're here 20 years into the industry and we sort of coast. And that's, I would argue, a very dangerous place to be in, because at the end of the day, we're the ones that the disciplines are looking at to define what it means to be a practitioner in that area. And so we have to be careful of that. So now that I've sort of laid the horror story of why I think it's so difficult to make this work, let's talk about some of the ways that we can make it work. The different paths that we have to our own individual professional development. The good news is it's never been a better time to try and better yourself, right? We have conferences like this one. And it's not just talking heads, right? Now, I come to these conferences. I am the talking head right now, so, cobbler heal thyself. But at the same time, there's so much more to a conference than the guy standing up on the stage or the woman standing up on the stage and the people out there passively consuming it while in between email messages, right? I get more out of a conference on the breaks, at lunch, at the bar tonight, generally, than I get out of the sessions. This is not to say that the sessions here aren't going to be amazing. They've already been really good so far. But there's only so much that you can do from up here. I'd much rather be down there, and I'd much rather be the guy up here sitting there talking to you guys rather than pontificating from up here. It's really that interaction that I think is the most valuable part of any sort of conference. It's that networking, and you just can't get that virtually. Now, I bring up virtually because there's lots of ways of getting training and education virtually. We have the wonders of the World Wide Web and the Internet. And so you can go to our website. You can go to any of the websites that you see on the site up here. You can go to Information Coalition's website, and you can find lots of really, really good training content. And that's good. Costs a little more. Okay, sometimes it costs a lot more. But whatever you want to get trained on, there's resources available to you in the form of a formal, somewhat standardized training course. And there's an assessment. And sometimes there's a variety of assessments. And then you get letters after your name. And that and $8 will get you beer most nights. I don't say this because I don't think training is valuable. I run the training programs at AIM. Believe me, I know the value of it almost to the dollar every year on my budget. But while training is good, again, I'm a big fan of doing in-person training as opposed to online training because, again, to me, the value of training is not the slides. It's not the handouts. It's not the book. It's the discussion and the interaction. And when we're all in a small classroom together and I get to ask a question and you guys get to share what you've done and what you've learned and horror stories and lessons learned and, okay, so how would you do this if you're in my organization, which is a whatever type of organization you're at? Well, I used to work for somebody that was kind of like that, but not really, but kind of, and this is what we did. And maybe you can extrapolate from that. You can't put a price on that, although we do. But I like that in-person interaction. We certainly have certifications. Again, I'm sort of the poster boy for collecting them. There's lots of certifications out there in the industry relating to whatever it is you want to do. If you want to get certified in privacy, IAPP has a half dozen of them. If you want to get certified in records management, there's lots of options out there. And in fact, the ICRM is here on the expo floor. If you want to get certified in something, all you have to do is have the time, interest, and a little bit of budget. The nice thing about certifications and why people go after them, for those of you who have never gotten certified and don't understand what the fuss is about, I believe that most certifications boil down, frankly, to being shorthand. In much the same way a college degree is shorthand, right? If you have a college degree, I can make certain assumptions about you, and I will believe those assumptions until you prove otherwise. I believe that you understand how to reason and how to write reasonably well and how to do critical thinking sorts of things. I believe that you have certain skills that you bring to the discipline. And so if you're a CRM, I believe you know certain things about records management. If you're CIPP, I believe you know certain things about privacy. And so we can sort of shortcut the discussion a little bit. And if I'm certified and you're certified, hopefully we're on the same page, we're talking the same language, and again, we can shortcut the conversation and sort of the feeling out what each one is saying and really move into the meat of the problem. So these are a great thing. I don't know that any one is necessarily better than any other. It really depends on what your career path is, and we'll come back to this in just a second. We have the massively online open course structures that have sort of popped up over the last 10 years. Now, distance education has been a long and sort of on-again, off-again thing, at least here in the United States. I got my degree in political science, of all things, in 2001, and I did about a third of my degree online. Today, of course, we have programs that are 100% online. When I went for my MBA, and I didn't finish it, partly for this reason, they sent me VCR tapes. This is 2002. We had the internet by then. They knew better. It was awful. But over the years, they've evolved through the efforts of Stanford and Harvard and MIT in particular, and now we have this rich, robust ecosystem. This is by no means an exhaustive list. This is just 5 of the most leading providers today. And many of them are backed by or have the support of various different universities, including Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and the like. Each one of them has their own little different take on things, but the nice thing about most of them is they provide you with different paths to learning. It's often a very customizable path to learning. And many of them offer you both academic style programs, if that's sort of your thing, as well as other more non-traditional ways. So for example, on Coursera, you can read a blog post, you can read articles, you can read white papers, and you get points for those. And at the end of that, you can earn micro-credentials. Now, is a micro-credential worth the same as a 4-year degree from MIT? Probably not. But is it worth more than what you have today? And it's just-in-time learning, and it's actually meaningful and up-to-date and current? Yeah, I think there's some value to that. The other thing is that many of them are very low cost or even free. A lot of the educational content that Stanford University provides is free of charge. You don't get a degree from Stanford, but you get the content. And isn't the content the more important thing? And of course, we have all sorts of informal and just-in-time learning. Things that you can do for yourself. Things that, if you're an e-discovery person, you should be following, there's about half a dozen blogs you should be following. You should be following the ACIDS blog. You should be following Ralph Losey, Craig Ball. I'm sure there's a bunch of them. John Jablonski, I'm missing a bunch of them. If you're a records person, you should be following probably Don Luters and, I don't know, there's a half a dozen of them. I've got them all listed on my blog. But there's all kinds of resources that are available for free or for very low cost. You just have to have the discipline and the inclination to go out and get them. Go to the vendor websites. They have a wealth of information, and some of the people that work at those vendors are world-class subject matter experts. I know we have several people in the room who are world-class subject matter experts who now work for vendors because they can leverage and harness those capabilities. So go out to vendor websites. Go out to our website and the ARMA website and the IAPP website. All of us have these rich layers of resources and case studies and white papers and research and all these sorts of things. Some of them are locked behind a registration firewall. Not a fan of that myself. I know I work at AIM and we do that, but I'm not a fan of that. But it's out there for the cost of your name and email address. So with all of the different things you can learn and all the different ways that you can learn about those things that you want to learn, what's the path forward? Well, I would argue that it's your own personal professional development plan. All of us have to learn. All of our skills get old and tired and stale and out of date. Nothing stays still in this world. Now, that's not to say that there aren't certain sort of timeless guidelines and practices and principles, right? We have generally accepted record-keeping principles. We have the e-discovery reference model. We have all of these standards and guidelines that we can look to for guidance. But how you implement them and how you use them to support your organization, the tactics, in other words, they're going to change over time as the technologies change and as we decide that best practices change, right? ISO 1549 for records management isn't the same as it was in 2001. The work that we're doing for an information management body of knowledge doesn't reflect the same disciplines and certainly not the same technologies as the original one from the South African University from 2004. And so we have to roll with the changes, but there are things that we can do to sort of move ourselves forward. The first thing to keep in mind is that it's your responsibility because, let's face it, you're the one paying for it. Most of the time, not all the time. I know that some of you in this room this afternoon paid for this conference out of your own pocket. I know some of you did. I know some of you paid for your travel out of your own pocket, and I know some of you took vacation to be here. Congratulations. That demonstrates, certainly beyond what I paid to be here, your commitment to your personal professional development, your networking, and all those sorts of things. That's an incredibly powerful statement. Depending on whose stats you look at, organizations are paying for up to 30 to 35 hours of training per employee within their organizations. That training tends to be weighted heavily towards senior management in things like compliance and governance and oversight, budgeting, that sort of thing. If you're a line staff person, often it's under 20 hours, and it's usually things that are mandatory for everybody, like conflict resolution and sexual harassment and those sorts of things that are things you're not supposed to do, not how to help your organization move forward. That type of training, we're the ones paying for it, increasingly. And that means you need to get good value for your dollar. That means you need to choose wisely because at the end of the day, you're the one paying for it. You're the one who knows what you want to be when you grow up. Now, some of us haven't grown up. Hopefully some of you will never grow up. You'll always stay the way you are. When I grew up, I thought I was going to be a Spanish translator. And then I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And look at me now. What my parents would say if they saw. So you know, though, what it is you're interested in. You know where your passions are. You know where your skills are. You know the things that you want to do and that you enjoy doing and that you're passionate about. So pursue them. But I can't tell you what that is. Now, I can tell you, if I'm your boss, I can tell you what training I think you should go to help drive the organization forward. And I might be right. But if it makes you unhappy to do that, why on earth would you do that? Instead, pick the things that get you excited, that make you want to get up and go to work every day. And maybe that's records management. Maybe that's information security. Maybe it's data governance. But you're the one that has to determine that path. And hopefully your organization is supportive and will help move you in that direction. Finally, it's your plan because you're the only one that can make it happen. Again, most organizations don't do as good a job of supporting training and professional development as they have in years past. I would argue that's not necessarily their fault. Part of it is that the social contract that we used to have where an employer guaranteed you a job and you guaranteed the employer your time until you got the gold watch and the pension, those days have been gone for decades for most of us. So if you're an at-will hire and an at-will employee, which many of us are, why would you not spend the time to make sure that you're as valuable to the organization on the one hand as you can and as valuable to your future organization as you can? And so again, it's your plan. You have to be the one that makes some of these decisions. Now the good news is, again, that a lot of these resources are fairly low cost, right? So you don't necessarily have to pay for it out of pocket. This is the approach that I use in terms of a professional development planning framework. Now it seems fairly simplistic. The devil's in the details. So what we have here is a model where down the vertical axis you see 3 different domains that I've grouped into sector or industry competencies. In other words, if you work in legal, there are certain legal things you need to know about client intake and client file management. And I'm not a legal guy, so I'm probably butchering that. If you're in energy, there are certain things you need to know about how energy information management is done. If you're in federal government, you need to know about the Freedom of Information Act, among many other things, right? We have information management competencies, as would be expressed in an information management body of knowledge. ARMA has a professional competencies model that they make available. Many of the records management groups and associations around the world, in fact, have something similar. We have our CIP. That's not quite a formal body of knowledge, but it does represent certain competencies. And again, most certifications have something like this, an exam blueprint or an outline or a competency model. And that's going to be specific to your role and also specific to your interests, right? So if you're an e-discovery support specialist, there are certain things that you probably need to know that I don't in terms of forensic imaging and forensic movement of data and management of metadata and those sorts of things. And so whatever your role is and whatever you want your role to be, we have certain areas there. And then finally, we have all of the soft skills stuff, right? Communication, change management, project management, conflict negotiation, all of those sorts of things that you have to be a professional in any sort of discipline. You need professional development and you need formal development in some respects in all these areas in order to move forward through your career. There are different skill sets at each of these levels if you're a clerk versus an analyst versus a manager versus a director, right? So that's one of the facets of this. The other thing, if you look across the horizontal line, are the different ways in which you can get this knowledge and get this professional development. And so we certainly have formal things like degree programs and certificate courses and certifications, and those are good. Those are generally not cheap. But they're formal, and you can put them on your LinkedIn or your resume, and you can say, look, I got letters after my name. I'm a cool dude or chick or other. We have informal things. There's lots of books out there. Books are not that expensive. I live a mile and a half from an Amazon Prime warehouse, so I get stuff in like 2 hours. But we have standards and guidelines, and they're not cheap, but they're out there. We even have things like social media channels. Again, all of those blogs. Find somebody in your discipline and follow them on Twitter, as long as they're not tweeting about their kids and their dogs and their kids' dogs. But if they're doing something in an area that you're interested in, whether it's your current job or not, I follow all kinds of people who do e-discovery on Twitter. I follow all kinds of SharePoint people, all kinds of ECM people, all kinds of, I follow like 10 people from each of the main vendors who do the majority of their tweeting. And I follow their blogs. And I follow that stuff not because I'm planning on jumping ship and working for any of them necessarily, but because I want to know what they're thinking. I want to know what IBM and Alfresco and Microsoft and Oracle and everybody out there, I want to know what they're thinking. I want to know what they think next year looks like so that I can sort of talk about it in my classes and to my students. Now, the last two are a little bit different, and depending on your organization, these may be a little bit harder to get access to. If you could get coaching or mentoring, that's brilliant. If you can get on-the-job training, that's brilliant. I don't know too many people whose staff is so overstaffed that they literally can't use another helping hand when it's time to do a records inventory or any discovery response. And I know you're all busy and you have full-time day jobs. I understand that. But part of positioning yourself for success is finding the time and making the time to do those things that you want to do, not just the things that you have to do because you get a review for it. So for each of these, I can't tell you what the right choice is. I know the choices I've made. I know that I read a lot of standards. I know that I read a lot of stuff across a lot of disciplines. I can't read everything across every discipline because nobody can. But you can use this framework and figure out for yourself, what do I want to learn in 3 months? What do I want to learn in 3 years? What are the things that I maybe need to save up money or time or resources for because it's formal and I have to go someplace for 4 days, like a conference or a training course? What are the things that I can do virtually from my house and still get as good or pretty close to the same benefit from? But ultimately, you're the one who has to decide how much resources, not just money, but time that you can commit and how you're going to make yourself as successful as you can be, not only personally, but in support of your organization. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your professional development plan. You're the one that's responsible for it. I know that this conference is going to be a part of that. I'm glad to be here. I hope y'all are glad to be here. Have a great evening and have a great conference.